Terrific. So let's each, a roll call. Nancy Nelson.
Nancy Nelson, Historical Commission appointee.
Thank you. John Cressley.
You're muted.
Apologies. John Cratsley, Select Board appointee.
Thank you, John. Paul.
Paul Baum, Recreation Commission appointee.
Thank you, Andrew.
Andrew Boardman, Planning Board appointee.
Thank you so much. And Eve.
Eve Eisenberg, Select Board appointee.
Thank you so much. And welcome Dee and Delia. And of course, Anne in the background here. And Anne, we're going to call on you quite a bit this time. So thank you so much. I want to begin by praising Anne for the work that she's done. I spent quite a bit of time with her reviewing the procedural policy, which she's brought to fine order and is in really good shape. We will review that at our next meeting, and also the community preservation plan, which we will review tonight, she's also done a beautiful job of putting that. I have some questions, and I'm sure we all do, but it really is in fantastic shape.
Yeah. Here.
And so Anne, thank you so much. I mean, you've taken on a huge job, and you've done it with such aplomb and with such grace. So thank you so much.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
And we'll get to that community preservation plan in a little bit. And Delia is here, and she's really at the epicenter of some of our questions. And so Delia, thank you for your extensive presentation and response to some of our questions. It's very much appreciated.
That was incredible.
And so I want to begin because this is a review of current applications and new materials received. Before we go there, Delia and group, I just want to remind us that there is an application which we received last year and granted $250,000 for, or thereabouts, for the Junction Village. Do you remember the whole landscape architectural program? Mm-hmm. And Delia, I wonder if in your plan for kind of land management and things, whether that will fall under that, because that area is now, we will have to rescind that money, bring it back to us. Should there be a new plan for Junction Village, we will then there can be a reapplication and a new application depending on what's there. But I'd like to begin by asking you whether the open space and recreation plan that you put into effect, or that you're asking support for, will include a study of that area.
So I'm sorry, I'm afraid that I've got my son's college call. It's a kickoff meeting, so I'm not sure if that's what the feedback is. If it is, Anne, I'm sorry, I can go and turn that phone off. But if you can hear me okay, and I don't have any feedback.
Okay, thank you so much.
So the Junction Village project is that land is not owned by the town. It is owned by the Concord Housing Development Corporation.
Okay.
And so what we look at under the open space and recreation plan is we look at public land, we look at private land, and we look at it from an open space and recreation perspective. As I think many of you know, that land was acquired with the intention of affordable housing many years ago.
It sure was.
Yep. And so where that will fit into the open space and recreation planning, it's a good question, Diane. When we look at, the open space planning, we have our wish lists for open space and recreation planning. And, we tend to look at those, on a very broad perspective. We look at them from the perspective of how do they fit in with where we have existing conservation land, where can they make connections, where are they, near areas of either recreational facilities like at Giroux, or where are they within areas of existing open space, conservation trails, so where are they connected? And then we try to also understand what the other town priorities are for other town needs. So I'm not sure where those, I mean, it's a good question, and I think we would want to look at that. But also, I mean, it was purchased for, that land was purchased for affordable housing purposes. The NRC worked with a developer many years ago when the permit was issued, excuse me, to make sure that some of the land was put aside for conservation purposes.
Mhm.
And we would certainly do that under the Natural Resources Commission review of any projects that comes in front of the NRC at a later date for a future project. As far as how that would fit into the open space and recreation planning, I will make a note of that
Thank
so
you.
that we can consider it.
That would be so appreciative, because since it drops off, since we'll have to rescind that funding, and we'll have to make a motion to do so at the next meeting, not this meeting, because it's not on our agenda officially, so we can't do it at this meeting. But we need to be able to I think I don't want to neglect the very good work that the West Concord Village group did on that land. And while you're not trying to replicate that, I understand, because it requires all sorts of things. I think your attention to, and thoughtful attention consistently to, invasive species and everything else that characterizes that land, I think would be really valuable. So thank you so much. So we're on the open space and recreation plan update and questions that we may have about that. I jumped right ahead of the queue here to ask that, but let me see if there are other questions. Paul.
Yeah, on the previous topic. So the land is owned by the Housing Corporation, and the project was proposed as open space and recreation as part of the Christopher Heights sort of combination. So what is the status of the land now? Could some group propose a project using that land with the landowner's permission that would be under the CPC's authority to fund?
Absolutely, Paul. It has to be entirely 100% affordable. That's 100% affordable land. And that's how we received it from the state, so that any development there requires 100% affordable development. So that's the first thing. The second thing is if we all remember who were on this committee last year. And hello, Burton, welcome. Nice to have you.
Thank you, Diane.
We all remember last year that the part of the way that the West Concord Village group was going to be able to take care of that land or address some of its problems was by using the big bulldozers and the big equipment that the Junction Village people were bringing in. So in collaboration with them, they were going to clear some spaces and knock out some things that are kind of in the way. And now, of course, that's not there. And so what we have a responsibility, therefore, to recall that project and put that on hold. Now that would just go into a recreation land open space reserve fund. But that's something we'll deal with, as I said, next time in a formal way. But because of that, it struck me that, looking at the natural resources study that Delia is talking about, that land now in some ways falls under that aegis. Or at least I hope there will be a serious nod to that space. Because we certainly learned from the West Concord Village folks that there are a lot of problems there. So,
I mean, I would point out though, Diane, that the open space and recreation plan is really, it looks at, when we're looking at lands that the town does not own, it's looking at prioritizing acquisition of those lands.
acquisition of those lands.
Correct. And so, we're not looking to make recommendations to how lands should be developed or managed or anything like that. It's really based more on, taking the whole town map as a whole and saying what lands are priorities for the town to acquire for open space or recreation purposes.
Thank you, Delia, for that
So,
clarification.
my question was a little different.
Okay,
Would
Paul?
the town have to acquire that property for open space and recreation? Could some entity, some community group propose to CPC an open space, a park, independent of Christopher Heights, a park. Aside, I mean, I understand the funding issue. There was the bulldozer, some of the excavation was sort of cost shared in there, but so that's gone. Can an application be filed using that land for some open space project?
Only for a very small portion of it. The rest of it has to be used by the state for affordable housing
Correct.
of one kind or another. There's a very specific section of it that was available and earmarked for open space and recreation under the state's aegis.
Right, but can that, I guess I'm
So
spiraling
the
into it. Can
CHDC owns that
space be
land.
used? What,
The
go ahead.
CHDC owns that land. They're a landowner, and any questions on how they would want that land to be used should be directed to them.
I'm not asking, I'm asking from a CPC perspective, could we entertain a project using that part of the parcel that's set aside for open space with the landowner's permission? Could the CPC entertain a project?
Well, if CHDC felt that it was not in contradiction to what their plans might be for that space, Paul, one presumes that we could enter into such a discussion. But it would have to be under the aegis and approval of CHDC, which is
Right, well, that clearly, that's what I'm saying, they're the landowner, but I mean, our rules are the landowner has to give their permission. If they gave you permission for an open space project, then I assume it might be eligible for CPC funding.
I think that is
I
undoubtedly.
mean, certainly Dealey would have to be consulted because of the technical issues, but
Yeah.
it's hypothetical. I'm just asking for,
That's a wonderful hypothetical question. Okay.
okay,
There would still be the constraints for affordable housing.
Absolutely. I mean, that
So I think they could be the landowner, but they have constraints that they, right? That they
absolutely. They
have to
huge
meet,
constraints.
so.
I mean, it's the land was given from the state to the town, to the CHCC with the understanding that it would be for affordable housing. And that there is some portions of it which would then be have open space and recreational usage, right?
Okay.
And so
Yeah.
that's what the
Right.
Concord group addressed and looked at. Now, how can we do that and how can we make it more attractive, more appropriate, more useful? I mean, a group could come in and say, look, we'd like to build affordable housing here. Here's what we'd like to do. And we'd like to really develop that land in the following way. And they could present a wonderful presentation for ways in which they'd like to enhance that land.
okay, so that interpretation says that you couldn't use the part of that land set aside for open space without the housing part. The housing part has to be part of any development.
Absolutely. I mean, the reason
Okay.
I think CHDC would not say yes is because they'd have to see first how that land was going to be used. I mean, somebody could come along and say, we're not even going to ask West Concord to have to give money for this. That's part of our plan. You know, that's what we want to do. We want to expand this and we want to open up the river. And I mean, who knows? I mean, all of this is a fantasy that lies in the future, Paul.
Okay,
And,
thank you.
yeah, that's your questions are wise and good, but I think that I think that's a fair response.
Well, they're good. I'm not sure they're wise, but they're good.
Okay, well, John, you're muted again. I'm sorry, hon.
Is it okay to turn to the application?
It is absolutely okay
Yeah.
to turn to the
And
application.
you have a question, Delia.
Mhm.
There's some references in here to a state plan. State-approved open space and recreation plan. Is there a relationship between this application and the state plan?
Yes, it's directly related to that. So the state-approved plan has been approved by the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, EEA. It's a clumsy name, but the acronym is easier. And the state requires that these plans be prepared in order to guide open space and recreation planning, but also to be eligible for certain state and federal grants.
Yeah.
This plan is an update of the prior 2015 open space.
Yeah, now I see why I now figure out my question that I wrote here. When does the state expect it for us to have grant eligibility?
Every 7 years, they need to be updated.
So there's no state deadline. Oh, 7 years. Okay.
There's no deadline. You know, if you miss the deadline, which we have, ours expired in February, we're no longer eligible for certain state and federal grants.
And this would enhance, this would make us eligible.
That's right.
Right. So for
Yeah, right.
example, we received the $500,000 for the Land and Water Conservation Funds grant application for the Assabet River Bluffs acquisition under this plan, and also $400,000 from a land grant for the October Farm Riverfront acquisition. We would not have been able to be eligible for those, you know, $900,000 of state and federal funds without this plan in place.
Right.
Thank you. Good questions. Any other questions, Andrew?
Yeah, I just wanted to confirm the $6,000 in project management fees, those are for your department's costs associated with development, or is that for an actual outside project manager? I'm just curious.
That's for the consultant.
Okay. Okay.
Do further questions develop in your mind from that, Andrew, or are you?
Oh, yeah, I guess so. The consultant would be the one who's doing the 3 meeting outreach components as well. Is that sort of how it breaks down? This is a breakdown of the consultant's time? Is that?
Right, so the budget that was provided is what the fees are for the consultant. We're looking for the consultant to provide these services. I would be overseeing the project from the town standpoint, but you know, any contract that a contractor enters into, they have their own project management fees. And yes, we want them to do the bulk of, you know, the development of the public meeting outreach, developing the presentations and collating the information, taking notes, that sort of thing.
Delia, thank you so much. And I just want to point out that Delia went out of her way to change her whole life tonight to be able to be with us. So Delia, thank you very much. I mean, it's
No
really,
problem.
no, but it's really appreciated. Nancy Nelson, you have a question.
I was just gonna ask, that's the whole project then, the $100,000 is the whole project, and I assume you've already looked at what was in line with other projects and in your past experience, so this to you is I'm assuming it is a solid, solid number.
I don't anticipate coming back to ask for more money, no, yes.
I wasn't anticipating. Yeah, thank you. Your response was really helpful.
And then Delia, we get to the more complicated application. And this is the one about the dredging of the Warner's Pond. And I had a very helpful conversation with Delia about this one. If you remember where we left this project, when last we spoke, was that Delia has said, look, we really need to, we need community public hearing and input on this.
Mhm.
You know, if we're going to do the dredging, it's going to be extraordinarily expensive. If we choose not to do the dredging, it would change the configuration of that area, but it would be less expensive in the long run. Perhaps, my own editorial comment, perhaps healthier for that whole land and area. And that is an editorial comment, not one that, I mean, I think there's approbation for that, but I'm just making that assertion. And we ask you kind of when that might happen, or when that would, you know, when that would be forthcoming. In a subsequent conversation you and I had, you said, well, look, we need to put some money aside for this, so that if in fact we need to move forward on the dredging, because we've already bankrolled quite a bit of money in anticipation of that dredging, we're going to need this additional money if we're going to go forward in that direction. Is that an accurate, would you say that's an accurate representation, Delia, of what you and I have spoken about?
Yes, so this request is really to be able to make sure that we have the funds to be able to move forward. I am, you know, I had not anticipated coming forward to CPC to ask for additional funds for this project, but it is a large project. It's one that the town has been working on since 2012 with the Warner's Pond Management Plan, and the town has supported this on numerous occasions with the 2018 dredging feasibility study. We've had a lot of public outreach. Town meeting has approved at least, so actions approving capital funding as well as CPC funding, excuse me, CPA funding for this project. And when I submitted this application, the bids had just come in the week before, or the one bid had come in the week before. And so with the CPC's deadline of September 16th and the bids having come in the week before, I needed to put an application in that was clearly going to request funding for some action that the community has expressed a desire to move forward with. I don't think it's a wise thing to keep asking for more money for something that is, we had anticipated in 2018 was 2.5 million. Cost estimates from this year were closer to 3. And with the, response of the 9 million bid, which I think, as I said at the last meeting, I think that's not realistic. I think it's probably, I'm just going to ballpark because I don't know, but let's say it's 6. That's a lot of money.
Yeah, that's.
So what can we do for less money that is going to accomplish community goals that have been identified and supported over many, many years, improving the ecological health and the recreational capacity of Warner's Pond? So working with a consultant that I am working to get on board right now, it's going to be looking at the 2 alternatives that I spoke about at the last meeting, which is moving sediment around the pond, so we don't have to deal with the trucking costs and the disposal. That's one option, or removing the dam entirely, which is another option. Those are ones that are, they're very different from what we had initially proposed, but they will both be an improvement over what is now a dying pond. And the community needs to opine on that. And I would like to keep this process moving forward because there has been a lot of momentum over the years from the town to see something happen here. So I'm trying to take money out of what has been allocated from capital funds to engage this consultant to do the tasks that I've identified in the memorandum that I've supplied to you. Looking at the 2 alternatives of the 2 options I just described. Once we have that information, we go out to the public and we get their feedback on, do you want to see no action, which I hope is not the case? Do you want to see the dam removed and restore that riverine function? Or do you want to see sediments moved around the pond to retain a pond-like condition, but make the pond smaller, create additional habitat? They're viable options within the scope of what has been looked at in the past. But, I mean, there's so many moving pieces to this, and with time deadlines, what they are, this is, the application that was submitted. I recognize it is not my finest hour in terms of the application that was submitted. I was working with very little information. I'm trying to get you as much as I can to provide you with the information that you need. But I don't, we talked about whether I should withdraw the application at the last meeting. I don't want to do that. I want the community to be able to provide their feedback and keep this moving forward. And we will need additional funds to do that. If it is dam removal, we could do it with the funds if they're approved at town meeting.
Right.
If it is moving sediments around the ponds, it is going to be additional funding. I've put in a request for capital for the same amount of 500,000, but that still is a little bit short of where we're going to be. So I recognize it's challenging for CPC to approve something like this, but I truly believe this is working within the parameters of the CPA, where we're looking to preserve community values. We're looking to it is all about open space preservation and recreational capacity. So that's a very long-winded response, Diane.
That's
Much more.
gorgeous, Delia. And I think in many ways, it's a placeholder. You can always reduce the amount of money. I mean, should you not need all of it, you can always come back and say, actually, guess what? We don't need all that money. Increasing it, you can't. So, I mean, this just puts you in a position with the consultant to be able to go forward if a solution is arrived at by you and the community that allows us to move forward in a way that takes advantage of the resources we put aside before in combination with these, to kind of create a solution. I want to remind people who maybe haven't dwelled on this property for as long as some of us have, which is that the Boy Scouts are also involved in this, because there's an island out there and they're used to being able to, it's been a kind of a long tradition that they go out there and they spend the night out on the island. And so there's all sorts of emotional traditions within the town that also play a role in this property and this space. And it's terribly important that we be aware of that, so that were we to present whatever we present, we are aware of the kind of the sentiments that surround this, of which I've only become aware over the last number of years when we've looked at the Giraud property and that particular pond. So I see we have lots of good questions. So let's start. Paul, would you like to start?
Yeah, so just a bit of a point of order. I think Andrew and I were sort of assigned to be the grand inquisitors on this project for the last time, and we never got a chance to ask our questions.
Oh, I'm sorry. Really? Yes.
No, we didn't, because Delia came in with a presentation that was different, and it almost felt to me like the application was being withdrawn or revised, and so we were expecting either the application to be withdrawn or revised. I'm not sure. So just with that as a preamble, I do have a series of questions. I'm trying to make sense of the application in front of us, Delia. I don't know if there is an application. There seems to be application A and application B. So there really isn't a project being proposed. There is a choice of two projects that we don't know which one's going to proceed or what the costs are. And I understand that both of them are going to require money, but I'm just sort of making a comment. What is the application in front of us now? Strictly speaking, we have to review an application as opposed to, I don't know. And by the way, this isn't the first time. Well, I know what's in front of us here, but it's an option. It's plan A or plan B. This is part of a project that's been funded over the past several years, which has been dredging of the pond, and there's been $800,000 set aside to that, plus or minus. So that was the project that was being proposed until the last meeting, and now I'm not sure. I guess, Delia, you're not sure how we're going to proceed on that. So that's my first question.
Can I respond to the first question before you go to your second? Because
no, that is the first question. What is the application that you're asking us to evaluate?
So I think that what I'm asking for is for additional funding, and the whole point of the project all along has been to restore Warner's Pond for ecological health and recreational capacity, and that's not changing. And we know that additional funding is going to be necessary, and if it's not, it will be returned. So yes, you're correct. There are two options that are in front of us right now, and we won't know what those are until the consultant has had time to develop those conceptual designs, and we have time for community feedback on those. But I guess my point is that if we're going to go forward with moving sediments around the ponds, and even if we go forward with the dam removal, the estimates that I have provided you with are very initial conceptual estimates. And I'm not sure that that's going to be enough money to do what we need to do. So I don't want to lose the momentum of being able to, the pond is dying, and it has been for many years. And the community has supported for many years restoring the ponds. And I would like to be able to have the CPC recommend approval of funding that would, in both the recreational and the open space capacities, preserve these interests for the town.
Right, but so it seemed, so my second question, given that you're in the plan, so it seemed to me at the last meeting when there was $50,000 set aside for consultants, that seemed to me a perfectly legitimate thing for CPC to fund. And then based on that, we would then look at additional funding. Isn't the full funding premature, given the need that you have to define the project?
So what I'm working to do is work to take money out of the capital funding that has been appropriated for this project and use that towards this design. So I'm not asking for that, and that was clarified in this memorandum provided to CPC.
No, I understand that. So,
Okay.
but I was just making a comment that planning aspect seemed like the reasonable next step. And the several steps of full funding, we'll have to talk about that, but it seemed premature.
I get that, Paul. I do appreciate that this feels like it's kind of, a moving target and it's a little bit on roller skates, but
I get it.
currently there is a surplus of funding in CPC's budget right now. That is not always the case. Being able to secure that money and use that towards a known goal and purpose does not seem like a bad idea to me, but that's my opinion, and I'm just,
Right,
that's
right.
your
If we
decision,
didn't-
but
If we didn't spend the money, it wouldn't be spent on something else. We'd go into reserve anyway. It wouldn't be lost. But putting that aside, you just mentioned that the cost estimates in these two, in the letter you just sent are their ballpark. I mean, it seems to me that those could be, the final cost of either of those alternatives could be prohibitive as well until we know that.
but Paul, they're always ballpark. They're always ballpark until they go out to bid.
Oh, I know, but right now we have a $9.5 million for dredging of 30,000 cubic yards, and your plan A here is dredging of 55,000 cubic yards. Now, granted,
Not
the
taking it out
disposal
of the
is different.
pond, which is where the cost lies.
Right. So it's different. So, but we don't know what that cost is going to be, and I think, so I think it's you admit that. The last time you spoke, there was a no action alternative, like do nothing. Is that off the table? You mentioned about the dying pond. I'd like more information on that since the pond's been around for a long time. But is the no action alternative, is that off the table? Just do nothing?
No actions are never off the table. They're always an alternative. And I can tell you right now, if I think we talked about this either at the site visit or the last meeting, but if there is no action at that pond, it will over time fill in and just cease to be a pond.
Okay, so I have a couple of questions on the recreational
Okay,
part of it. So when the project was conceived, back a number of years, Giroux was in play. And so to me, when you talk about the recreational use of the pond, the Giroux had some major access, both fishing and boat access. Right now, that's off the table, as far as I know. That's not in the current planning. So the only recreational access would be in the Commonwealth Avenue entry. I'm just wondering what the recreational value would be if Giroux isn't in the plan anymore. I mean, it seems to be a very good use of the dollars to dredge the pond if Giroux was going to be a major access point of the public. That's not the case anymore.
So when the plan was initially conceived, Giroux was not in play at all. This has been in place since the Warner's Pond plan was developed in 2012. It had been worked on for a year or two at least before that. Giroux was acquired in 2017, 2018. 19, I'm not, 2000, let's just say 2018 anyway. I mean, we
2018.
had been planning on doing these improvements at Warner's Ponds for years before Giroux was acquired. I think it would be really nice to see some improvements from Giroux, but there's been a sort of, I think, a reckoning with, there's been a lot of money put towards recreation projects. Just because of the timing of things with the Giroux acquisition and the White Ponds Beach gift and some, the associated improvements there. And, I mean, that's been a lot of money that's been put towards those recreational improvements. So yes, it would be really nice to see improved access from Giroux, but that's not what has ever driven this project.
Well, but
And,
that's
the access from Commonwealth Ave that's been a long standing access that, I mean, it is so degraded right now, both from the physical getting down to the ponds and then getting into the ponds, that it doesn't feel like an access anymore. And Giroux might feel like a little bit more of a, an easier access, but it's certainly feasible to bring that back.
Well,
If that's how the town decides to proceed.
It's qualitatively quite different. The access in Giroux would be kind of substantial, but you talk about community backing. I have to imagine that Giroux, I don't know for sure, but the recreational value of the project, I'm not saying it was never there, but it's limited in terms of, you have 8 parking spaces. It's quite limited by not having a Giroux access. So the applications have mentioned Giroux, and this one does as well. And that's kind of not part of the rationale anymore from my perspective. I just want to put that out there. But the question on the ecological part of this, the total dredging, I think, I don't know, it was like 15% of the pond plus or minus would be dredged. A large amount of the nutrients are coming in from the drainage basin itself. What in the calculus says that the ecological improvements are going to be made if such a small part of the pond is actually being dredged and the source of nutrients is outside of the pond? So I guess I'm questioning the ecological rationale as well.
And so is that the question? What is the
Ecological value? I understand removing invasives, but you're only dredging 15%. It's dredging a small part of the pond. And where's the data that shows that the whole pond will be rehabilitated by dredging 15% of the pond?
And that's separate from the impact on invasives, which I think we've covered would probably be impacted by increased depth, but whether eutrophication itself would be impacted, because you said it's dying.
Yeah, because you said the pond is dying.
The pond, if there is no action taken of the pond will fill in, and it will, I mean, the pond itself as a pond open water system is dying. That's just, it will lose its open water capacity to support ducks and swans, which are invasive, and don't get me started on swan. But the swimming fowl and fish that rely on slow open water, that will go away if the pond fills. It will change and it will become a different system. But is that what the town wants? Is to have a pond slowly fill in and eutrophy, which is not, it's, I mean, if we went out there and we saw what the pond looks like, and it will continue to just get weedier and weedier with invasives, which are not at all ecologically valuable. It will reestablish into some other, ecological condition, which has value. It won't be an open water system. As it can be, it's a manipulated system right now as a pond, as an impounded pond, it's a manipulated system. It can be improved to be dredged in certain ways. Some are more expensive than others. They offer ecological benefits of, varying degrees. It can be converted to a natural riverine system where the dam is removed and it is, left to its own devices to some degree. I think we would want to see some management of that now open water change to a vegetated wetland. We talked about this at the last meeting where it was retaining, people want that open view, manage it as an open meadow, a wet meadow. These are options that would be evaluated. I don't have answers for those because those are.
I understand that. My final comment is, we're not losing the money. If we're not spending it this year, it goes into reserve. And so based on the planning that you have and the money you already have in there, I don't see how the project would be, if you decide to go forward, it would be impacted by waiting a year to really figure things out. And then, Diane, with that, I'll pass the baton.
Thank you, Paul, so much. Eve. And then John, Andrew, and then Burton.
I'm just going to be quick. I have a couple of simple questions and then one difficult question. I was able to read a little bit more about Warner's Pond in the 2015 Open Space and Recreation Plan. And I learned about the Stewardship Committee of 2004 and the 2010 Warner's Pond Watershed Management Plan. But I'm kind of wondering if there's any kind of coalesced information database or narrative since 2015, because you guys keep talking about all this, has been funded, and I find bits and pieces of information here and there. But is there available, that information somewhere online, maybe?
Yep. So there is a 2018 dredging feasibility study that is online under our plans, reports, and brochures page. There, as part of that study, there was a public forum, and I can send you the presentation if that's helpful. And then as part of the permitting that we did over the last year, we held a public forum to re-engage the community to explain what the options were. And I'm happy to send that presentation along as well.
I was just thinking if there was like a news report or something, somebody's blog that described it all.
No,
That's
I'm sorry,
okay.
there's not.
And then my second question is the new OSRP consultant do this work as well? The Warner's Pond consulting work, because it seems pretty much aligned.
Right. So the open space and recreation plan update would go out for bid, and it would be evaluated on qualitative criteria. I doubt, well, I'm not sure actually, EA, it's EA, forget their full name. It's EA Engineering and Environmental Services, I think is their full name. They are a full services firm. The prior firm that we worked with was more of a pond and lake management. So I'm not sure if they would bid on it or not. I mean, we would just take in the bids as they came in and evaluate them.
Okay, so the plan and then the Warner's Pond efforts are they're totally separate, and that's not done by the same group.
They're not, I mean, they might be done by a different consultant, but it's all under the aegis of this division. I mean, I'm directly involved in both of them.
Okay, third question. Is there, and this is probably more for Diane, is there like a trust, an open space trust similar to the housing trust, where we can just bank a lot of cash that the planning people can get to when they're eventually hiring people to actually do construction work or destruction work or whatever happens?
Eve, that's a wonderful question. They can't just get to it, but we can put aside funds and we can earmark those funds for housing or recreation and open space and or for historic preservation, particularly if we've not met our 10% minimum in each of those areas in a given year. We can put it in a general fund, the kind of a holding fund, Or we can put it in a very specific area and say, this is something we'd like to do. We don't think we have the right application for it right now, but we'd like to go forward with that. It then requires time because somebody has to come back and make that application, but those monies would be available to us.
Okay. I
Yeah.
think I understand. I might have to hear that again sometime, but here's my final question and I'm lowering my hand. This is just more whimsical. I was biking with my daughters and the bike path, and I noticed all that work that had been done next to the pond that didn't even really seem like it was finished yet. And you probably haven't thought about this, or maybe you have, but I'm wondering what happens to that if the pond goes away from a town resource management type of point of view.
It's a good another very good question.
Yeah, that's a great question. So I have thought about that. Because I'm trying to vision what happens with the different alternatives. If the moving around the sediment option is embraced by the community, I don't think anything changes at Giroux. If the town elects to move forward with dam removal, it does change. Everybody, all the abutters, from, Giroux, then down along Commonwealth Ave. And probably that's the extent of it, is down to the intersection with Moss Brook Road. That pond frontage goes away. And what does that then become? And that needs to be modeled to be understood. I don't know if it means it becomes a swamp. I don't know. I mean, if that's the case, and that's what the consultants through their modeling determine, and that's what we bring forward to the public meetings I'm trying to get these scheduled prior to town meeting. I think that plays into how the town wants to proceed with, what to do with, either option A or option B. But it needs to be modeled.
And even
Thank you.
if I wasn't clear, if we were to say, gosh, we don't think we can support this right now, we're going to put the money aside while consultants come in and models are developed and the town has a chance to adjudicate its feelings, Delia could then come back and that money would not go away. It would be earmarked for that in a reserve. And that's something we can do.
Okay, thank you.
A year's hiatus. Does that make sense to you?
It does.
Okay, good. I'm sorry if I was unclear before.
No, that's okay. It's me.
Well, I don't think so. Your questions are fabulous. John Cressley.
Yes, Delia. I have a lot of sympathy with helping you with your bankroll. It seems to make sense because we're going to have a lot of money now that the legislature gave the whole CPC another 20 million to add to the funds that, we'll get our part of it. But my question is, I don't understand what the bankroll looks like. How much, if we fund you this year and we funded you before, how much CPC money would you have after town meeting?
$3 million.
No, I meant from the CPC.
Oh, she already has, from other sources, 2.5. Yeah.
I'd have to go back, John, and look at how much, I know it's 2.5 total that we have right now. I don't remember what the breakdown is between.
That's what I was trying to get at. The CPC would
I
have
can get you
put
that
in,
information.
I'm trying to see the CPC portion and then the town portion. And then at town meeting, would you be getting more town money in the town budget? Or is your town money? Yeah.
I'm sorry. I have requested an additional $500,000 in town funding as well.
Okay, so that would grow your bankroll to 3 million?
3.5.
3.5 million. Okay, thank you.
Minus the 59,000 that I'm engaging a consultant with right now to do this modeling.
Okay, thank you very much.
John,
But it's actually the CPC request is 550,000, so it's almost it's almost 3.5 at the end of the day.
What's the old CPC number?
800,000, so it would be about 1.3 in total, John.
Thank you.
We're talking about a lot of money, but at the time, Delia's presentation, for those who weren't part of that discussion, which John and Burton and I will remember, and Nancy will remember, it was that she was asking for money gradually so that over time she'd have enough money that when the dredging project was defined and ready to go, she could just dive right in and do it. It ends up that a variety of circumstances have changed. But Andrew.
Yeah, no, thanks. That question from John helped get me part of the way to my question. Was at right now we have a project which may or may not have a scope, and my question is, at what point does the plan that's arrived at deviate too far from the existing CPC authorizations and that they need to be reauthorized by town meeting? So for example, I know that town meeting authorized, I think it was Article 44, $500,000 was for, and part of the summary of the project included boat launch access and recreational improvements. Well, if those aren't happening, that's $500,000. Does that money need to be called back and then resubmitted to the CPC? It's just a question I don't know the answer to, and I don't know if it's a Delia question or not. But it's sort of what point does that happen? And then further along those lines.
Interrupt you for just a minute and say
Yeah.
that one of the fascinating things about this Giroux project, and I'm saying fascinating in the kindest way, has been the way in which it has morphed in so many directions. When it was originally presented to the town, it was that this would be a swimming hole for West Concord, which didn't have one. And over time, that's literally how it was presented years ago. And then it's changed and changed and changed and changed. And so your question is very apt. I mean, what was a move many years ago is somewhat different than what we're looking at right now. So I just want to assure you that you're not, that you're right.
Diane, if I could jump in on that point, I think that may not be quite accurate when we're talking about Giroux versus Warner's Pond.
Go ahead.
And Andrew, to your point about, well, what happens if there's not recreational or boat ramp access? And if I'm understanding Delia's proposals with continuing to investigate the Commonwealth Avenue entrance, we're still talking about the boat launch and recreational access from that point. But the history was, and because since I've been around, I've been following this since well before I was on the CPC. Delia is exactly right. This discussion started well before the consideration of the acquisition of the Giroux land. And when the Giroux land became available, and the history of it as being a swimming beach came to light, people got really excited about that. And yes, that did build some of the momentum behind this dredging project. But pretty quickly thereafter, the White Pond contribution was made, and people said, why would we invest all of this money to bring this up to a swimming standard or what have you when we've got White Pond? Let's focus resources there. But this project continued to have merit, and so I think that that recreational piece, to the extent it existed, was there from the beginning. That was a canoe launch, which I can tell you, I've launched canoes from there. It's just a shin deep walk through mud, and then you're not canoeing, you're poling across that pond, which is about 12 inches deep in a lot of places now. But that's still part of what's being proposed. I just want to make sure there seems to be this tying to the Giroux project, and this originally wasn't tied to the Giroux.
That's a very fair emendation of my comment. Thank you very much. I actually meant the same thing, but I didn't say it as well. So thank you, Burton. I was say, Andrew, I'm sorry I cut you off. Please keep going because your question.
No, and mine wasn't necessarily tying to the Giroux. We're literally just once the plan moves away from boat launch at all, does that become a problem where everything has, and it's just, I don't know. The other question I had was what happens if this money is given or impounded or whatever the process becomes, and then no consensus emerges? Like how long, the consensus was however many million, like the lower number was a great use of money for the plan that existed. Now, all of a sudden, we're asking for almost as much money to get rid of the pond entirely, or a little bit more money to cut the pond in half. You know, all of a sudden, these alternatives are fair. Even the reasonable alternatives are fairly extreme. So, you know, the hope is to get public forums together in advance of town meeting. So the answer won't be for when this committee needs to make a funding decision. It'll be maybe for when it actually has to go and be presented before town
For the
meeting.
town meeting.
Might be the first time a lot of people are hearing that the scope has even changed.
No,
So, it's just a question I had of process and
And
whether this might be premature.
that one thing I can tell you is that each project has 30 months. During which time it has to either be expended or returned. And right now, one of the things we're doing is bringing back some of that money that hasn't been expended. That's part of the very cleanup work that Anne is doing, actually, with that long list of resources that are sitting out there. But essentially, there's a 30-month proviso, and if after 30 months the project is not, we have not had, assurance that is moving forward and being spent appropriately and then it reverts, or we certainly have the opportunity for it revert to the CPC funding. So there is a limit in terms of how long this thing can kind of float out there. And so that's not unimportant. Nancy, am I wrong? No, Nancy, you're muted.
That's not an absolute limit, though. There are conditions under which it is explainable and reasonable to extend the.
It can be extended
Difficult.
if there are circumstances
Yes,
warrant
yes.
that. But by and large, that's the kind of,
Yeah.
those are the bookends around the project. And that's
Right.
actually in the CPC language, and it's in the state
Right.
provides.
Well, and this project's been extended.
Oh,
Yeah.
this project has been, but certainly not, I mean, we've been working on this project for quite a while, as you can
Right,
hear.
right.
A long time. Yeah.
And it was always planned as a multi-year funding process, and then we had a pandemic. So I think everybody understands the extension.
Right, right.
Yeah,
Can I just respond to the public notification comment? I mean, I don't know if I mentioned at the last meeting, but certainly the intention as part of this. I would like a robust public comment on this. I don't think that
Mhm.
10 or 50 people should be making this decision.
Right.
So, what I envisioned was sending out a notification to every resident in town saying, we will be holding a public forum to talk about the future of Warner's Pond, and it will have enough information that should jazz people up to, come out to a meeting. And, I was talking with somebody about this, and they said, oh, you could just put notification in the Concord Bridge, and that's going to every household now, which is tremendous. And that was a thought, because it's a big cost saver. But maybe we do both. I mean, I really we need to have, this is a big deal. It is, it's a lot of money. It is a change in how things are proceeding over what we have talked about at town meeting and in public forum in the past. And it will be a big change for the town, one way or the other. No action, moving sediment to the pond, or removing the dam. So, or we proceed with the limited dredging and ask for more money, which that's, I suppose, another alternative, but,
Well,
who wants to spend 6 million when you can spend less and accomplish, the same goals? And that's what we need to evaluate, is what goals can be accomplished under what we are, now looking at.
And I just want to express my respect for that desire. I mean, that is, I think the best kind of government, is it not? Where there really is a vigorous dialogue between the citizens and the administration of the resources, and that's just so admirable. Burton and then Nancy.
I actually, most of my points have been addressed, but one question, Delia, do you know if the dam's removed and the pond turns into a modest stream, brook, I guess, or it fills in? I'm wondering if it's like sort of the laws around, shifting rivers. Who owns the land underneath it? Does it remain all Concord land? Do the backyards extend out?
Oh, that's great.
What happens with the 100-foot setback? Could some of those the Di Giovanni land on Losbrook be developed?
Whoa,
So great question. You guys are full of really good questions. The GIS map shows that the limits of Warner's Pond are owned by the town.
Right.
Deed evaluation would have to be, that has to be looked at from the deeds to determine, do the deeds say that you own up to the edge of the water? Or do you own, 172 feet northwest, and then you hit a bound, and then you're going, so all of those would have to be evaluated. The deeds are going to be what rules on that. And in terms of whether or not what land is developable, what becomes wetlands in the non-open water condition. I mean, if the pond is just left to fill in, it will, those limits won't change.
Because it'll be swamp.
It
More or
will
less.
just be swamp for, a long period of time, and stagnant swamp unless the dam is removed.
Right.
But if the, if the dam were removed and it became a free-flowing brook, it would have to be modeled to see where those changes would occur in terms of regulatory jurisdiction.
Got it. Okay. Could open up quite an interesting research project looking at those deeds. But I would almost guarantee they would say to the water's edge, and then over to the corner where the cow pasture was, and
Right.
and that there's some
Right.
some meat or bound. That's,
But if it
Yeah.
changes from a pond to a stream, that may be different.
What happens to the island?
yeah,
The
It's
island
not-
will remain uplands.
the
But how
scouts
you
build a
get to it
casino.
is, are you,
How you get there is going to be another whole story. Portaging.
I just the last comment, I will say also, as somebody who has camped on that island on a few occasions, and recently enjoyed the view from the newly installed Giroux Parks. It is fantastic as a pond. The islands are incredibly special because you would think that they would be overgrown and swampy places, but they're pine forest and blueberry with nice, dry, good ground for camping. They're an amazing resource, and the view from that pond. I know that the swans are invasive, but I sat there watching the swans and the ducks and all the rest the other day, and there was some people walked by me, and we said to each other, "Isn't this perfect?"
yeah.
And it really is a beautiful resource. So thank you, Delia, for your contributions to that. And with that, I'll put my hand down. Thanks.
And very few invasives too.
That's just so gorgeous. Nancy and then Paul.
I just wanted to endorse the idea of not moving forward with any set plan without this component of public engagement. It's a big decision. It's Delia needs the funding to do that, I think, correctly. Is that correct, Delia? That part of what you're asking for is the ability to fund and engage the community.
So
in
I
this
actually, Nancy,
discussion.
I'm using funding that we have already appropriated
Already.
to engage a consultant.
Okay, already.
Yep.
And that will inform. Well, then the only other thing I think is really important to look at the no action alternative, because I know you've delineated to very carefully but the no action alternative, given the controversy that might surround this once it gets out there. It's always an interesting alternative. So,
Thank
Thank
you. A ballet, who would have thought?
okay, I'll take my hand out.
Parts, Paul.
Yeah, I mean, finally, so please forgive my pointed comments. I'm trying to understand and improve the application. I want to thank you for wrestling with this. This is really complicated for a relatively small pond.
Mhm.
It's a complicated set of issues. I would mention one thing. When a consultant takes a look at the sort of the ecological part of this, there may be an ecological benefit of establishing mudflats around the stream. It's a different habitat, and it may not look the same
Right.
from Jerome.
Right.
But in terms of birds and biodiversity, it may attract a whole different set of waterfowl and wildlife by having mudflats, because there's a lot of food down those mudflats. So, you know, it's just a thought. It's called the net environmental benefit. A lot of these projects, you look at the net environmental benefit of various options. So there could be some improvement by establishing a stream. I just want to mention that I think that's an important component
Right,
when
right.
discussing this with the public who thinks that the only option would be keeping it a pond. That may very well be the case. But changing it to something else could actually be beneficial as well. I don't know.
Yeah,
So
that's a great point. And I would say under both conditions, mud flats could be accomplished, and you are 100% correct that they are high ecological value. I mean, they're full of, you know, crustaceans and insects, and you have all kinds of wading birds. You've got egrets and herons and, you know, sandpipers and all kinds of things that will come in and feast on those. And that could be accomplished under both a stream, you know, a reestablished stream condition, as well as modified dredging that moved sediments around the pond.
yeah, so instead of a beach at Jerome, you'd have a bird viewing platform.
Yeah.
Right.
Right.
Love it. Delia, thank you for the time. Thank you for the helpfulness. We realize this is very complicated, and your patience with our questions and
I thank you. I really appreciate the additional thoughts and comments and feedback from the committee.
yeah, and the thoughtfulness of this committee continues to impress me so much. Thank you, Delia, so much.
Thanks.
Okay, John. Oh, are you waving goodbye to Delia?
Just thanking her, waving goodbye.
Anne, I wanted to clarify one more thing before we go any further. Last time there was some confusion about the public hearing. And I have now had a chance to go back to my old calendar and look to see that I hadn't entirely lost my mind, and I hadn't, which is a great relief. We are not having a public hearing on the 29th of November. We are presenting at the FinCom public meeting on the 17th of November. And the FinCom has actually called us forward to do that, and we shall. There'll be another public hearing in January for the regular warrant, but we will not have a public hearing on the 29th. And I'm going to have to present at the FinCom public hearing. And anybody who wants to join me and support me, you are very welcome to do so.
When is that again?
On the evening of the 17th at 7 o'clock. It'll be both virtual and in person. We might use the 29th, however, as a committee to just cement, you know, our final sensibilities about the projects, nail down some recommendations, and go forward from there. And do a reading over the break or the holiday of the CPC procedural manual, and just a chance to review that so that we can nail those two things. So we will have to change the website because it says that we're going to have this public hearing on the 29th, but we're not.
The only point I was making the last time, Diane, was that we always did have one. And so
Yeah,
it means we're abandoning it this year.
No, we're not abandoning it. We're having it.
different
We-
date.
They're
Last time
just
we-
they're two different things. In the past, we had a public hearing and public came and talked just to us. And then there was a presentation to the FinCom, and that was separate. So but just by going to the FinCom, the public will be there, and I understand what you're doing. So the only point is it's different from the past.
It's so interesting, John, because as I said, I went back and looked at my old calendar to try to figure out, what had happened before. And of course, under COVID, things have been so bizarre, haven't they? So what may have been normal may not have been normal.
Yeah, I'm sure it was pre-COVID. Because I remember, I think Burton might remember, we went to one of the elementary schools and we opened it up and every presenter came and the public who were interested came. And, but I think I'm sure you're accomplishing the same thing. So it's just different.
I don't know that I am, John, but I at least I didn't do something last year that I don't remember doing, which is an enormous relief for those of us who are gracefully
So
aging.
Diane, what do you present at FinCom?
Well, at the FinCom on this coming Thursday, Paul, what I have to present is our warrant article.
Okay,
So what we'll do is put a slide up that shows the warrant article. We'll address the various issues. And then we'll probably put up a second slide that shows, all right, so that money is now going to our reserve, and with a little arrow that suggests it's then going to go at
right,
the regular town meeting to the, which is something we have to write that and agree to do that.
right. So it's a warrant article. So it has nothing to do with the applications in front of us.
Nothing to do with the applications, because those applications, Paul, are for the regular town meeting.
Right. So I have a
Those
question,
are
something.
at the January public hearing. I'm sorry, go ahead.
So during our last discussion, the question of reserves came up. And yeah, so we are under applied and overfunded. How do we make decisions on? Is this part of a deliberation process? How do we bin the various excess money, general reserve or specific reserve funds? Is that?
That's what I
Slated.
hope. That's what I hope, Paul, and thank you for asking that very good
Yeah.
question. That's what I hope we will do on the 29th. is to-
Okay,
To begin to sort that out a little bit. On the 29th, we're going to have to decide, we're going to have to put forward a warrant article ourselves to say that we're going to give that housing reserve money if it passes in the town meeting, special town meeting. We're going to have to get that one ready to then go over to the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust Fund. We're going to have to review, and then we're going to have to make some deliberations and some decisions about the existing applications to see whether we can fully fund them, or believe that we should, believe that they're appropriate funding. And see if there's anything else that we need to ask from any of our applicants before we go forward.
thank you.
And it would be nice to get that done earlier rather than, mid-December. I mean, it would be fantastic. Because the warrant's going to be due before then. So that's presently the plan. Thank you. Someone said the very nicest thing about this committee the other day. They were saying what a really smart, they had sat in on this meeting a couple of weeks ago, and they said, my golly, that committee asks good questions and probing questions. They have really read the applications carefully. And, that is the reputation of the CPC, that you all are living up to it with such aplomb. Nancy?
Well, I may ask a silly question, but if I can ask a question about the Assabet River Bluff Community Housing request for $400,000 additional funding, correct? So,
They're not asking for additional funding. They're asking for what they asked for to begin with, which is $100,000.
right, today CHDC is asking CPC to reconsider accepting an amendment to this initial request to increase the amount to $400,000.
Where did you see that?
On the meeting materials, and it was 5 slides
What?
from the community preservation folks. Whoops.
At what time was that on? I mean, I've read everything right up until 6 o'clock tonight.
I don't know. Maybe I was looking even later,
Oh my
but I saw this and on page 3, it said the additional funding can accelerate the project schedule. So did anybody else read that? Because I'm confused about it.
I literally have not seen that. So, and I
Okay.
read every document I could find on our website.
Okay,
I don't believe that that's anything new. I think that was part of their presentation from before, since I haven't received anything since their
Well,
presentation.
it does say October 18th, but it also says they're requesting additional $400,000. Does that make sense? Am I missing? I could be missing something really obvious here because I'm not a numbers person.
Well, I thought they were going to, and then I understood they weren't going to. So I'm very confused.
I thought they were going to, in order to advance,
The project.
to move the project along. Yeah.
You're right, but I have not.
But, and the date on the front is October 18th. Does that
Which
make
was,
sense, Anne, to you?
Right, that was our meeting. So that must have been what they presented that
Yeah.
evening. I haven't
Oh,
prepared
okay.
those minutes yet,
So,
but I can certainly do that.
so
and
anyway, I
double
just
check and see what they
wondered,
said.
in any case, what they were saying the money would be spent for seems to be very much like what the $100,000 and 50,000 from other was going to fund as well.
Well, let's ask them to come to our next meeting, Nancy.
I may be wrong, and
No,
somebody here may have looked at this and can straighten me out, but I had to ask the question.
I do. Thank you so much for asking. I'm stunned because my last conversation with Lee Smith was that they were just going to ask for the regular amount that they originally requested. And
Oh, well, that's interesting. Maybe this is old news then.
I don't know, but we'll ask them to come to
Okay,
the next meeting and see.
okay, okay.
Is that all right?
Yeah, it's fine.
Thank you.
There was an awful lot on that meeting documents list. So.
And I read, every letter and all the support and everything else. I didn't know there was that was there. So I'm so grateful.
Okay, thank you.
We don't know how much the state is giving us yet. So we can't make any, final deliberations about money because that's all being, and Anne, can you tell us when you think that's going to, I know it's imminent, maybe tomorrow, today, tonight?
Oh, tonight. Ooh. Big night.
So I did check in with Gail Dowd, and she was preparing the final numbers. She was still reconciling her books. And according to the CPC website, or the Community Preservation Coalition website, state funding would be distributed today, but I haven't heard anything from the town on that.
So it's premature for us to figure out how much money we have and what we can do with it.
Right.
Even though
Do
we're
we know what the town part of that is yet? When
No,
does
we
that
don't.
come?
No.
When does that come?
No, we're still, that's what Gail Dowd is working on.
Today, hopefully, but
We've
not.
we've usually known this ahead of time, Paul. You're absolutely right. We've usually known it in early November. And this is now
Well,
mid-November, and
I thought we were talking about the state share. There's a town share and then the state.
I'm talking about both. We've usually known, we've usually known certainly the town share earlier, and then
Right.
we've got the state share just before this meeting, actually, usually, and we've been able to kind of cobble it together. But that's not the case this year, so.
Hmm.
I
So
know
let's,
that they're switching over to a new system too, with
okay.
all new accounting numbers. So it's a busy time for them. Mhm.
So Anne, can we please go to the community preservation plan review? And I'm sure you've all had a chance to look at it and read it through. You can see what an expert job Anne has done in terms of addressing things. And I have 5 questions. So I'm going to exercise the prerogative to ask those questions first. If you could pull up the document for us,
Okay.
that would be fantastic. And perhaps first go to page 8. Thank you so much. There is a comment here which I'm not sure I understand, and it says that Concord's general budget appropriations are made each year by the annual town meeting based on projected revenues of the upcoming fiscal year, plus the state match. The town of Concord fiscal year or budget year extends from July 1st to da. And then it goes on to say, usually these projected revenues are augmented by an allocation from free cash, which is a portion of the unreserved fund balance of CPA funds from the prior fiscal year. Now, I have not understood that it was under free cash. I thought we had a reserve fund of our own.
No
And
way.
the town's auspices is free cash. Can you reconcile that for us?
Right, this is the language that was in the plan from before. And I
Right.
had a question about that free cash too, and I did raise the question with Mary Barrett, the town accountant. And she said that that it is sort of an unreserved balance within the CPC funds as it is described, but it's treated as free cash from an accounting standpoint. So they do need to reconcile it the same way they reconcile the free cash, I think, from the general fund with the state every year. So that's the reason why there's this long delay in having access to those funds.
See, I find that not okay.
Right.
I mean, I think that money should be not in the town's free cash budget, because we've discussed, you and I've had a chance to discuss the fact that the money that has been being held by the town, we can't even gain access to this year, even though we can see it's free and has not been spent for many, sometimes many years. It's just sitting there. We have to wait a year before we even have access to it. So that would cause, I would think, any thoughtful committee to be reluctant to hold cash in reserve if the town is then going to sequester it and make it unavailable to the committee directly the following year. And
I think there's sorry.
Go ahead. I would like to, I've read all the state materials on this, and I think that at least I find that there's something fundamentally wrong about that kind of accounting, and I wonder how everybody else feels. Does everybody understand what I'm talking about?
I can clarify a little bit that there's a difference between the unreserved fund balance, where it is sort of this open-ended bucket, right? Versus the reserve funds, which you could have access to more quickly. And because if it's in the undesignated fund, I think it's held up for a whole year. Whereas if you put it directly into a housing reserve or a open space reserve, land acquisition reserve, or historic preservation reserve, then you would be able to access it almost a year earlier than if it goes into undesignated funds.
Thank you. That makes sense. But here's the problem right now, folks, is that when Anna and I went through and figured out the amount of money that is sitting out there that has not been spent this year, I mean, that up to this date has still not been spent and is not going to be spent. We do not have access to that money this coming year. So we couldn't take that money and say, oh, look, we have an extra $200,000 that's just been sitting out there unspent. We could now spend that this year. We can't. We have to wait a full year to be able to do that. And I think that accounting process requires some deliberate discussion. That's all.
Diane, when you say unspent, is that uncommitted and
No,
unspent?
committed but unspent, Paul.
Okay,
So
so
when
it's,
we looked at that list of projects, and we could see that some of them are very old and they're essentially kind of almost closed out, and some are closed out, but there's this money that's been unspent. It seems to me we ought to be able to aggregate that money. And were we in a tight spot this year to aggregate that money and commit it to a project starting in 2023? We can't do that. We have to wait a whole year, is what we've been told.
Is it,
We have
Unless
a
you put it
comment.
into a reserve fund, I think is the stipulation.
I'm sorry, hon.
I think unless you put it into a reserve fund, and then you would have access more quickly.
Yeah, but we don't put it in reserve fund because we put it for a project, but that project then was not drawn on. So when we figure out that accounting, it seems to me we ought to be able to rather quickly gain access to that money, since it has not been drawn upon by the applicant. And it sits there just in fallow field, as it were. Now, we're not in a
Right.
tough spot this year, so I'm less alarmed by it, but in the but as a principle, it causes me some concern. John?
Yeah, well, they, in the highlighted yellow above the sentence that you worried about, it says, according to Mary Barrett, we should be able to access funds from projects closed out.
Right.
So right away. So I take it is there 3 different categories, specific reserved funds that we can get access to, undesignated funds that have this problem of a year delay. And then what category is this closed out project money? Now, I'm just hearing Ann say it could be put into a specific reserve and used that very year as part of a specific reserve. That may be one trick or technique to
Right.
take these unspent monies and get immediate access to them if they're put in a specific reserve. Is that what you understand, Ian?
That is my understanding. I think you're looking at an older version of the plan, since I have taken that highlight out, that was, Mary Barrett was actually mistaken.
Yeah, I don't see that, John, in my version.
All right.
Any rate, I think it's something we need to look at, and we need to discern why the accounting works that way, because I think the CPC in a tight year should be able to have access to unspent funds and not have to wait a full applicant year to be able to gain access to those. And so
Totally agree. Totally agree.
I mean, I just like to figure out why that is and see if we can't address this. And I don't know to whom we address it, whether we ask our town manager to come and talk with us about it, or what we do. But I think for future funding, it's something we ought to address. Eve?
Well, actually, that was my question. Who do we address this to? And you just said you don't know, so.
Right. I mean, I think we probably ought to ask Carrie to come in and talk with us about it. She has been the town treasurer and she does know the accounting systems inside and out. And maybe we could get her to come in and talk with us about it, because it causes me some concern. Okay. Other comments on this particular issue? Could you go to page 15, please?
Good.
Page 15, wherever it is. Okay, on number 2, I think we need to edit this because it says that the CDC is currently working with the Grantham Group to construct an entirely affordable assisted living development on the site. So we need to fix up the state-owned land there, because that's not happening. I'm sure other people caught this, so I apologize if I've stepped ahead of people. Nancy?
Is that all on page 15?
That's, for me, that was the only thing on page 15.
I had a small thing on
No,
page
I've got other ones. I've got
Oh,
5.
sorry.
That's right.
I just trying to stay in order.
That's right. On page 22. Is this page 22? Fantastic. Just for our own edification and in terms of consistency of language, needs of the 250-year revolution celebration is called Concord 250 celebration. So if we get that language in there, and it then is going to be consistent with the language that the town is going to be using. Okay, and that's new, and that's been confirmed.
Okay.
That's not something anybody could have anticipated. On page 28 for a minute. So okay. Improve trail access and safety in partnership with the town. I'm reminded of the Reformatory Branch Trail. And I'm wondering about the language of improved trail access and safety in partnership with the town. I think that and I just would need everybody's wisdom and advice on this one. Does this fly in the face of the town vote last spring to not touch the Reformatory Branch Trail and to keep it as natural as possible? And of course, then I think of the old rifle range and other trails that we've really done exactly this, improve trail access and safety in partnership with the town. So, do we need to say improve trail access when appropriate?
Well,
Appropriate in
Diana,
part-
if I recall the discussion around that, and I don't have either that article from town meeting in front of me or the select board's letter endorsing the same with respect to the reformatory branch trail. It wasn't that there couldn't be improvements made for accessibility and trail surface and the like. The idea was to, specifically with respect to that single trail, minimize any removal of trees and to leave it in its natural state. But I think maintaining this, even the proponents of the article talked about making improvements to the surface as necessary to make it more accessible, or what they viewed as being accessible. So I think maintenance is an appropriate term here.
I
Okay,
do too.
thank you. I just needed to hear some conversation about that, Burton, because it became such an issue last spring. And
Yeah, sure it did.
continues to be, incidentally, because of
Yeah.
what Bedford is doing. So, I
Yeah.
mean, there's just all sorts of stuff rumbling around about it, and I just didn't want us to trip over something, so to speak, that would put us in an awkward position. So you would,
Are you saying it as a general principle, trail access isn't a good thing? I know specifically you have a question here, but it seems harmless from a overall principle.
I'm not saying how, I mean, I just think that we just need to be careful, because if access means making something accessible to handicapped, fully handicapped people, then that means a profound change to the reformatory branch trail surfaces. If we just said improve maintenance and safety in partnership with the town, I think maintenance becomes a more neutral term. Access, in fact, augurs all sorts of other things. And so I don't think that access was, in fact, I mean, I think there was a kind of general acknowledgement that some trails are going to be better for some people and other trails are going to be better for other people. And in terms of the sentiment last spring. So I just,
I'm sorry, technically maintenance is not allowed under CPC. It's about preservation and it should not be used for maintenance. So that's why I removed that word.
trail preservation.
Preservation, that's better. Okay.
So Paul,
How
I'm
about-
not making a comment about it because I'm not trying to, I have an opinion, but I'm not trying to impose it here. I just want to make sure that we're not doing something that we find trips us up in the future and somebody says, well, look, you said here, that you were making it access. So that's something you need to do,
If
Yeah.
if you just said safety, that would also include improved trail access, potentially. It's a broad topic.
Yeah.
And trail access means very, very different people, or different things to different people.
That's the reason I was curious about the language, Nancy, and I just wanted us to look at it as a committee and see what language we felt was the most appropriate going forward. John?
Oh, I just think it's a generic term and doesn't really have any political danger for us. It's a generally good goal.
Of course it is. Yeah, Andrew?
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I would read access as anything going along with a trail. Getting people to a trail is access. It's not access. You're not creating your own live wire. So I wouldn't worry about it, at least the way I read it.
Okay,
Me too.
I'm happy to ignore the language. I just wanted to make sure that we vetted it in terms of the very vigorous discussion last spring.
Yeah.
Okay. Then could we go please to page 35 and 36? This is, we can skip this, and you and I can talk about it offline. It's simply a comma issue. And it's not going to impact the meaning of anything. Okay. So I can bring that up with you separately. Okay, and it does, literally does not influence alter the meaning of the document. So we can vote on the document without it's just a punctuation preference. Okay, other comments from people who've read the document? Nancy, you have some.
I had one on page 9, and it's something maybe I can talk to Anne about. I know this is a quote, the acquisition, preservation, rehabilitation, and restoration of historic resources. I know this is a quote, but I've been concerned about language in the plan that doesn't explicitly call out landscapes as a historic resource, and I know this quote didn't. So maybe we can discuss, you know, the geeky definition of cultural landscape, historic landscape, historical site. This quote doesn't really include landscapes unless you call it real property.
Now, Anne, you had landscapes in there and historical structures and landscapes including. Now, is there a reason why you removed that?
Right, let me see. It said historic,
Resources include.
oh, that's right.
That quote didn't include it. I forget the source of that. It might be in the chart of what you can spend money on for historical projects.
But we know
I
that there have been landscape emendations made to projects. So I don't think it's illegal to do that under CPC funding. So I just wondered,
Sorry. Go ahead.
so maybe it should be put back in that historical resources include our historical structures and landscapes, including a building structure, da, 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 da.
And it's historic landscapes are included in language throughout the plan,
Right.
other sections. So it would just be important to know that an agricultural landscape, for instance, is not a historic structure or a site. It's something different. A building, structure, vessel, or real property. It's real property, I guess.
Right, I think that's what I was thinking, real property. So maybe just in brackets, put landscapes after real property. Or
Say
like
including landscapes, including
right,
landscapes.
after real property, put landscapes in brackets, just to show that it's not a part of the quote.
Yeah, maybe that would work, because it's very limited, a building, structure, vessel, or real property. It seems very limited because it doesn't take into account historic sites. I'm working from a Park Service definition of
Mhm.
cultural resources. Anyway,
Right.
but something that doesn't leave out landscapes, I think.
Thank you for that.
We'll work on that.
That's really helpful. Do you have another one, Nancy?
Nope, that's it.
John?
Sure. Diane, almost many of mine were yours, so that's great. They're done. But on page 16, I wondered, well, it's actually a connection between page 17 and page 16. On page 17, number 10, we've acknowledged the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust.
That's right.
But in the list of housing opportunities on page 15 and ending with 7 on 16, we don't mention the Concord Municipal Affordable Housing Trust. And I just wonder if they've become a significant enough housing opportunity and they're going to play a major role going forward. We ought to actually acknowledge them as number 8.
I think that's a very good point, John. And I know that Keith Bergman and the folks on that trust committee would very much like to work more collaboratively with the CPC through memorandums of understanding, through figuring things out, through working. I mean, I know that collaboration is something very much on their minds.
So it would just mean drafting a number 8 that would describe who they are and what they do.
Mhm.
On,
Good idea.
on page 16.
That's terrific.
All right. Moving on to page 30. There is at the bottom under the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. It's expected to be completed in June 2019. I think we now know that they're saying that what I got in the mail from the rail trail, they're not expect to dedicate that bridge now till 23.
Right.
I'll change that.
Nice
Um,
catch, John.
And then on pages 30, this is Diane, is really one for you. Pages 33 and 34. I noticed on 34, everything was struck. It's number T about special situations, because we just been through that on the affordable housing. And it says, see page 37, and it says redundant, see the previous page. I'm not sure it's adequately captured on
Yeah.
page 33.
Right, I think the page number shifted. It's actually on page 32 and it's right at the top. Let's see. In one of these. This special situations such as the imminent placing of land on the market.
Oh, yeah, okay.
You see
As
that?
long as Diane's comfortable, because I know it's something that's been really important
Mhm.
in being sure that that the world knows that we do stuff like that.
Yeah, I think it is important, John. Thank you very much.
Okay, that's it.
Fantastic. Eve.
On page 2, I think that my term doesn't end in 2023. I think it ends in 2025.
Yeah.
At least that's the document that I signed.
Great, okay, I'll fix that.
You know, Eve, we've been eliminating you and then getting rid of you early.
Oh,
Good.
Not so
sorry.
impressive.
On page 23, on the third paragraph. Yeah, it says down here in the middle, the new 2015 open space and recreation plan. Since we're asking money to get an even newer open space and recreation plan, I thought we should take the word new off of there.
Mhm.
That's, I wondered about that too, Eve.
And then on page 26, you might have already caught this, Anne, but on page 26, there were, numbers 4 and 5 there are weirdly indented compared to the rest. That's not very important. But, and then finally on page 31.
Mhm.
Do we need a number 6 that talks about the bike path here, since we're putting a warrant together to get money to improve the bike path? It just, maybe it wasn't so important last time, or I don't know. I don't even really know what I'm talking about, but that's what I thought.
This is part of which section? I'm sorry.
Criteria for project.
Criteria.
Oh,
Recreation opportunities.
It just seemed to me to be a list of things that we were working on. And
yeah.
I thought the bike path could be added, or I don't even know how you'd phrase that.
It's not a criteria for project review. The bike path is mentioned on the previous page, right? As a
Right.
priority.
As a
Yeah, I don't,
At the bottom, number 9.
I think it's covered.
Particularly once we have it as 23 and not as 19.
Yeah, I think that's okay.
Okay, anybody else have any commentary? And all of this, as you know, is not a criticism. It's all just what happens whenever one edits.
Of course, yeah.
That you've done just a gorgeous job, and thank you so very much, because I know this has taken forever. And I also want to thank the committee for your patience. I know there were a lot of people who just wanted to review this a long time ago, but by giving Anne the extra time to really go through this, I think we've all profited.
Yeah.
by giving her the chance to really look it over and use her experience. Incidentally, she's receiving an award on Thursday night for her work in this kind of world in her previous place. And so, and our congratulations to you.
That's great.
That's really exciting.
Great.
Okay, other business. Now, I thought we'd approved the minutes of 20 and 27 of September, but
Diane, just a quick question sort of related to this. The procedures manual, that is in progress, as you
yeah,
mentioned.
it's been edited, but we didn't feel we had time for people to read it, Paul, so we'll do it at the next meeting. So as I said, it's up there now, or it will be
Okay.
up there. I think it is up there actually, and then everybody can read through that and we'll look at that one at the next meeting.
Yeah, okay.
And that means that all of Anne's work, which has been so incredible, now can all have, all come together. And we will have two very sound working documents.
Yeah.
And that's so impressive. Okay.
So I have a tiny thing.
Yeah, of course.
Tiny. I was asked to research this idea about whether or not CPA funds could be used to fund private projects. And I looked around, and the Community Preservation Coalition, I'm not going to get this centered right, but if anybody cares about it, the answer is yes, depending. So this is really good, and it talks about when it can be used, and it addresses the anti-aid amendment for lawyers who have heard of this before, maybe. I thought it was really useful. Once again, the Community Preservation Coalition is really valuable.
Isn't it amazing? Maybe, Anne, we could put that up on our website. That would be fantastic.
Yes, okay.
Thank you for doing that. And for those who don't know what we're talking about, it has to do with whether if you owned an historic home and you wanted to be able to apply for funding because it was on the historic register and it was a recognized property, and yet you really couldn't take care of it yourself, could you apply for funding? That doesn't mean you get it, but you could apply. And that's not an unimportant thing. And Paul, that addresses some of your concerns about public outreach to be able to use funding. And that's that's all not unimportant. So I believe we'd already okayed the minutes of 20 and 27. I think it's the next minutes that we haven't done, Anne. So I think we can post 20 and 27.
I don't think you voted on them.
Okay. So the minutes of
yeah.
September 20th, does anybody have any changes they would like to offer?
No.
Okay,
None.
May I hear a motion to accept those minutes, please?
So moved.
Thank you, Nancy.
Second.
Second, thank you. All those in favor, I have to go around. Nancy?
Aye.
John?
Yes,
Eve?
Yes.
Andrew?
Yes.
Burton?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
And I as well. So it is with those are confirmed and passed. And then the minutes for September is 27th. Do I hear a motion to accept those?
So moved.
So
Thank
moved.
you, Andrew.
Second.
And second, thank you. All those in favor, Nancy?
Aye.
John?
yes,
Eve?
Yes.
Andrew?
Yes.
Burton?
Yes.
Paul?
Yes.
I as well. So those are both accepted and we should be posting this. Okay. And we'll look forward. I know you've got so much on your plate, but we'll look forward to the minutes of the other meetings. Is there any other new business for people before we adjourn? I want to thank Linda Escobedo. You were probably, Linda, at a housing committee program.
There was the Housing Production Forum tonight, so I apologize for coming late. May I just ask one question about the plan and good work for all that has been done on that? And perhaps you already covered this, but I had a question about on the title page, it says 2024 or FY23. So I'm confused about, is this a plan update for this particular year that you're working on, this fiscal year that you're working on, or was this meant to be the plan for the subsequent year? And I'm assuming it was for this year.
I think it's both 23, 24. I think it's this year and going forward.
Well, if it's FY 24, we know that the whole housing section is probably going to be updated and changed. Just as an example.
So 22, 23.
Yeah. So,
So I think it's the town meeting in 2023, but the funds become available July 1st of 2023, which is FY 24. Did I get that right?
but, typically the CPC updates this plan each and every year, or mostly they have. And I thought the plans were always for the current fiscal year that you were operating on.
Well, Dee is here. Dee, can you address this? Hi, Dee.
Yep, hang on a minute. No, I can't.
Oh.
Okay.
I can't either, Linda. Your
Okay.
command of this is impressive, but I don't remember doing as thorough a review of this as we have this year.
No,
There was a period of time, however, where we were looking at them each and every year and updating them. The other thing while you, however you deal with that issue, the other thing I noted, and again, I apologize if you already discussed this, with what you're calling a procedural manual being now separated. Is it referenced in any way in the primary document?
Yes.
That it is, okay, good, okay.
Yes.
Page 6 and page 32.
Yeah, good question, Linda. And by separating it out, it's really fantastic because this procedural manual is so helpful for anybody applying now. I mean, it's just really fantastic.
So it would sort of be both documents, not only in the narrative, but maybe somehow on the cover should reference each other document so they know that they need both.
That they need both. Let's hold everybody's hand. You're exactly right, Linda. Because the process is not not readily discerned by the outsider, as Dee always reminds me. Diane, people have no idea what the CPC does.
Anyway, thank you for letting me insert my comments at this point.
Oh, no, it's wonderful. Dee, do you have any comments to make about what we've done tonight?
I think I have to say, I'm so glad that we had the conversation about the pond, Warner's Pond, and the amount of information that I learned tonight about some of what is being considered. I'm so in favor of getting a meeting out to the public. I think that's very important. And otherwise, nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you. Now, Paul, you have your hand up, and John, you do too. Is there a comment? Paul, you wanted to add something?
Well, yeah, it's a little other business. I've had some offline conversations with Anne about how we classify projects in particular. And this is not for this meeting, but I just want to throw that out there. We have 4 categories of funding, but yet when we list projects, we combine open space and recreation. I'd like to take a look at that and actually have 4 categories and listing them. The reason why I say that is because when we combine open space and recreation and we count them 50-50, we tend to put anything in the recreation category, even if it's part of open space, when in fact the plan, the types of projects in the plan under recreation can be quite different. So I'd like to see if we can separate, if we can, like Bruce Freeman Rail Trail is a recreation project. That's how it's listed in the plan. Other open space projects are clearly open space. And the reason why I say that I'd like to capture the funding we're putting into the recreation category more accurately.
That's prudent advice. I think we also have some projects which are just recreation or just open space. And
Correct.
we're capturing open space with the hope that it will also be used for recreation. So then that's where the slash works.
But recreate, look at Delia's open space and recreation plan, that it says recreation, but it's not, the recreation category is quite different.
It is quite.
It's active recreation as opposed to passive recreation. I mean, it's very ambiguous. I'm just trying to get the ambiguity out of our classification.
Paul, we'll have to discuss it. One of the things that I'm remembering, of course, is the Aspet River Bluff project, in which we talked about that as open space and recreation, because hiking trails are going to go in, and an opportunity to really use that in a way that is vigorous and physical and part of staying healthy. And that's part of recreation. So, I mean, I think that as we discuss it, we're going to have to figure out how we parse those distinctions, or whether we want to parse those distinctions.
Yeah. And I'm taking my lead from the plan.
In our brains before we next meet. I'm sorry.
Yeah, look, I'm taking my lead from the plan. So what we call open space, because there are recreation pieces in open space, passive recreation, walking on trails, versus active recreation, playing fields, etc. So we'll table that for now, but I'll just bring that up.
As someone who's gracefully aging, taking a good walk is recreation for me.
Yeah, it's very recreational. Very recreational. It's just not structural.
I know, but just.
I'm just having fun with you, Paul. Okay, thank you all so much. Do I hear a motion to adjourn?
Well, I have another question,
Sorry.
Diane.
At this, I shouldn't put your hand down. Go ahead.
What is our target for our final warrant? Is there a date is it in January? We have a meeting on the 29th, another one on the 6th of December. Are those our target dates for our warrant?
My hope is December 6th, John, if we can do it.
Okay, great.
I mean, if we had a more complicated set of applications this year, that would be unrealistic, but I think we'll find that with some vigorous discussions around some of them, that many of them are just pretty straightforward. And so if we can nail this by December 6th, that would be a great relief, I think, and we could get those, into the town and get them vetted by Carmen and the select board and others, okay?
And do we have a January meeting?
There is one on the books. And it is January 3rd, but it's my deepest hope that we don't have to have that.
Okay.
Yeah, possibly omit, it says.
Possibly omit, yeah.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for asking, John. Will you be in Spain again, or in France, or in Peru? Darkest?
No. No. I'm very interested to get our warrant article put together, so that's great.
I'm just teasing you, because last year we were communicating with you in far off climes. I just watched the Paddington movie, having watched the moment with Queen Elizabeth and Paddington Bear with our little 7-year-old granddaughter. So Darkest Peru is on my mind. Please take care of this bear. And thank you all for taking care of us. This has been a good meeting. So may I hear a motion to adjourn?
Motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor, we can just wave our hands on this one. Terrific. And once again, kudos and thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anne.
Thank you.
Thanks, Anne.
Have a good night.
Good night.
We finished. Oh, do we have to vote on?